Well, welcome back to Managerial Accounting and to our classroom annex, otherwise known as my home office. And we're finishing up chapter 6 in this brief little video segment. And there are two topics that we didn't get to in class because of our initial discussion about the reviewing stuff from Tuesday, which I think is time well spent. And also my little tirade about catching up on the homework. So here's another subtle reminder for those of you who are behind on the homework to catch up. Actually, the weather's not going to be all that good, so you won't have to worry about giving up a sunny day to catch up on your homework. So what we're going to focus on here is margin of safety and cost volume profit analysis for service organizations. What we've seen throughout the semester is many of the concepts that are valid for manufacturers are also useful for service organizations as well. So margin of safety and cost volume profit analysis for service organizations, the last two objectives in chapter 6. So let me share my screen here. And let me start with the margin of safety. And let me make that nice and big. There we go, margin of safety. Let me get my head out of the way. So hi, that's me up here in the corner. So margin of safety, what is the margin of safety? Well, this is the possible decrease that could occur before an operating loss occurs. So we know that in our cost volume profit analysis model, we assume that sales is just a function of volume. We know that we have costs, and we have costs that are both fixed and variable. So if we put these things on a graph, picture a graph with a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, with the horizontal axis going across this volume, and the vertical axis could be either costs or could be revenues. So our revenue curve will start right in the bottom there, where what we say the origin is, where the volume is 0 and the sales are 0, and then it slopes upward. And then our cost, there's a point where we start with our fixed costs, and once we know what the fixed cost is, we put that on the vertical axis. And then it slopes upward for the variable costs. So that's what we talk about in general, the cost volume profit. That's the relationship graphically between revenues and costs. And we know where those two lines intersect is the break-even point, where the cost and the revenue lines intersect is break-even point. And if you go to the right of the break-even point, you have profit. And if you go to the left of the break-even point on that little horizontal axis, you have loss. So the question with margin of safety is, how much of a decline in sales could I have before I go into the loss territory? And this is called the margin of safety. So if you go down to the bottom of this slide here, margin of safety is the sales that we currently have minus the sales at the break-even point. So the sales at the break-even point, and then we divide that by sales, and that gives us the margin of safety. So in this particular example that we have here, very straightforward here, the sales are 250,000. The sales at break even are 200,000. Okay. And so if you divide that sales minus sales at break even divided by sales, 250,000 minus 200,000 divided by 250,000, you see they have a 20% cushion, which means that they could have, the margin of safety is 20%. They could have a 20% decline in sales and be at the break before they actually go into the loss territory. Said another way, they are currently above break even. If they had a 20% decline in sales, they would be at break even point, right? So that's the simple concept there. Margin of safety, sales minus sales at break even divided by sales. The margin of safety is the percentage decline that you could have in sales. Boy, this sounds like a good multiple choice question. The percentage decline in sales that you would have before you break even, hit the break even point. Right? So let's take a look at a hypothetical example here. So we've got a company that has sales of 800,000. Its break even point was 680,000. And what is the margin of safety for sales? So think about that for a second. Sales of 800,000, break even sales of 680. What is the margin of safety? Well, so it's one of these percentages, and don't go making a blind guess at one of those percentages. Do the calculation yourself. So if we do the calculation, it's 800,000 divided by 680,000 divided by 80,000 will give us our margin of safety. So there we are. 800,000 is our sales. Sales at break-even is 680 divided by 800,000 gives us a 15%. So I would interpret this to say that the company could lose 15% of its sales before it breaks even. And if they lose more than 15% of their sales, they're going to drop below break even. Right? So that is what we mean by margin of safety. So let's do a quick little exercise here. So what I'd like you to do is to pause, as interesting as I may be, pause the video here, take a look at the margin of safety exercise, exercise 7 on page 284 of your text. Hit pause, and then come on back, and we'll see if you did it correctly. Right? So I shall see you shortly. Go ahead, don't hang on, go do this yourself. Margin of safety on page 284. Take a break, do that, and then come on back. Hit pause here. Okay, welcome back. So we know the margin of safety is sales minus sales at break-even point divided by sales. Sales minus sales at break-even point divided by sales. In this example here, the sales were at 1,750,000. The sales at break-even were 850. Sales was 1,750,000. So I've got a margin of safety, meaning of 50%. That's kind of a good place to be. We're well above break-even there. So I could suffer a 50% decline in sales, and I would before I would be into the loss territory. Okay? So again, it's very helpful to conceptualize this topic of think of that cost volume profit analysis graph, where the going across the horizontal axis is volume, and in the vertical axis you put both revenues and costs. At the point where the revenue line equals the cost line, that's break even. You go to the right of that, you have a profit. You go to the left of that, you have a loss. So the margin of safety is how much of a percentage of decline that we can have from the current sales before we go into the loss territory. Right? So that concludes our discussion of margin of safety. Now, the other little objective or topic that we have here is that let's see if we can apply cost volume profit analysis to a service organization. So what might be, and so the answer is yes, many of these concepts are relevant here. So it could be relevant to education, could be relevant to, I'm not going to do them all, but air transportation, two things that most of you are familiar with. So you all attend Suffolk Community College, so you know that there's some type of planning process that the dean has to go through each semester to decide what the break-even point is on a course. And those of you who fly, and most of you have some experience with flying, know that there is a break-even point for air transportation. You know, how many passengers do we need on the flight? Do we have enough passengers on a flight to pay for the cost of the flight? So let's see how this works. So let's take a look at a non-credit course here. Let's apply cost volume profit analysis in academia. Academia is a different world, but it is concepts from business are applicable there. So we've got a non-credit course in pottery. Okay. So years ago, we used to tease that people who weren't taking their studies seriously were studying basket weaving. Not to offend anyone who makes baskets, but we could probably, some might say the same thing about pottery. If you've seen the movie Ghost, you have a whole different view of pottery making. Okay, so without further ado here, with this pottery course, if you're the person, the dean of the art department, do I have enough students to make this course worthwhile to do this course in pottery? Well, we know that we've got to take a look at the fixed costs, and we got to compare those to the contribution margin per student. So our fixed cost here, we've got $3,000 to pay the instructor. It's kind of a little bit lower than what we usually pay instructors. And we've got rental costs of the classroom of $1,500, so the fixed costs are $4,500. And then as far as the contribution per student, well, we know that we have to invest in pottery supplies of $300, and we know that there are enrollment costs, registration costs, and so forth of $320. And we're assuming here that the tuition is $500 per student. So what is the break-even point? Well, we've got to have 25 students in the class in order for the class to break even. if we take the fixed cost of 4,500 and we divide that by the contribution margin here of 500 minus 320, which I believe is 180. So you can see here that break-even point works well in a service organization, just like it would in a manufacturer. Okay. So that concludes our discussion of Chapter 6. So at this point, you should be able to classify costs as either variable, fixed, or mixed. I think the big homework problem in Chapter 6 at the end had you do that. You go a whole series of costs and you've got to put them into various columns there. You should be able to compute contribution margin ratio, and the unit contribution margin. How much does each unit contribute? So the difference between the sales price and the variable cost. Determine the break-even point necessary to achieve a target profit. You should be able to do that. So you could get break-even point and the number you got to sell to achieve a target profit. Right? You should be able to use a cost volume profit chart to determine break-even point and the sales necessary to achieve a target profit. You should be able to compute break-even point for a company selling more than one product, compute operating leverage and the margin of safety. These are all good multiple choice questions on the next exam, and there'll probably be some problems in these regards as well. And then describe and illustrate the use of cost volume profit analysis for decision making in a service business, whether that be an airline or sea. All right, so I hope you found that little mini lecture useful. So go ahead and finish the homework from Chapter 6 if you haven't. Catch up on your homework, and we will see you all on Tuesday for the beginning of Chapter 7. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your Friday, and have a great weekend. Take care, everybody.